So you just read Esrahaddon, which is by far the longest book set in Elan, but it still wasn't enough for you? Well, you're in luck, because as part of the editing process, Sullivan actually cut out about 31,000 words, aka 7 chapters, aka almost 100 pages from the book. He did this because of how the beginning of the book flowed. But here, we don't care about that. We just want all the juicy Elan information we can get. So today, we're going to go through the 7 chapters that were cut and see what we can learn. 2 quick warnings. First, this will obviously contain some spoilers for Esrahaddon. And second, because this wasn't published, none of this is canon. So technically, anything written in these chapters can be changed, denied, or erased entirely, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can't go to Sullivan in a year and say, "But you said Turin could play the lute." No, I didn't. Alright, enough of that. Let's get started. First, let's set the scene for these 7 chapters. All of them occur in the first 3 sections of the book, so they're pretty early on. One of the cut chapters is from Sadarshakar's point of view, and the other 6 are all from Jarish's point of view. The book starts off the same as it does in the final draft, with Ezra finding his goblin family and Wandale returning to Persepliquis. Then 3 years later, the first deleted chapter occurs, Sadarshakar. This chapter deals with Sadarshakar and Hannes Orf as they have just arrived in Persepliquis to begin their work as counselors. We see how they had their plans to reach out to Erevan even back then. We also see how optimistic and naive Sadarshakar was in the beginning, while Hannes already had his contempt for humans. This is mirrored as they are immediately mistreated because of their race. The people of Persepliquis have already fostered their distrust of the Fray, and the rumors of the Emperor being held hostage have begun. We meet Counselor Hargrave, who is amenable to the Frey counselors, and is mentioned in the final book. We also meet Mort Killian, who is a descendant of Amicus Killian, one of the main characters in Nolan. Unfortunately, Mort Killian never made the final book draft. The next cut chapter occurs 1 year later and is titled The Problem Child. This chapter introduces us to Jarish at the age of 7, while he was attending the Ryanilian seminary. He is very much a problem child, as he has already been in 23 fights, including several that required medical care. This stems from his mother's dying wish that he defend Navran's name and honor. The leadership of the seminary is discussing how to handle Jarish when Deacon Kyle, who is almost certainly Turin, suggests that they send him to Persepliquis to submit him to the Teshlar Guild. It is at this point that Sullivan injects one of his patented Turin God jokes. More money, less trouble, and a pat on the back from the great Bishop Venlin for a job well done. Deacon Kyle, I think you're right about a message from Navran. When things line up this perfectly, what else could it possibly be but divine intervention? Deacon Kyle gives Jarish the blanket, which we see in the final draft, and Jarish travels to Persepliquis and the Teshlar Guild. One thing that stood out for me from this chapter is when I read Esrahaddon, I was thinking Jarish was an orphan. But while his mother is dead, this chapter outlined that his father, Master Hale, is a moneylender in Ryanilian and is very much alive, though Jarish hates his father for the way he treated his mother. The next chapter is Knightly Virtues and begins the very next day as Jarish gets acquainted with the Teshlar Guild. He is almost immediately brought to Master Rawlings and told he must use a sword to kill another child who is tied up. He is told if he refuses, their places will be reversed and he will be killed. Jarish refuses, as does the tied up boy, who is Logan. It turns out this is the first entrance exam of the guild, as they don't teach people how to kill if they think you'll become a murderer. This knowledge gives a bit of context to where later in the final book, we see Darius Surrett complaining that he was tricked, as he obviously tried to kill the other child and failed the test. As we fast forward, we see Jarish training harder than all of his classmates. We also see him attend the Summer's Rule Championship Tournament, which is a sword fighting tournament held once a year for all of the knights in training. The children, aged 5 through 12, use bats, which are wooden sticks used for training. Ages 13 through 16 use blunted metal swords. And ages 17 through 18 use real swords. As Jarish has not been training for 3 years yet, though, he cannot participate. but he does watch, which inspires him to train even harder. We also learn that only a very small percentage of the knights in training will ever become full Teslar knights. And as a final tidbit, we learn that Deacon Kyle, aka Turin, used to play the lute. Now we get into part 2 of the book, past the chapter where Ezra learns to use the art and another Mwandale chapter. This chapter is titled The New Boy, and starts with Jerish being punished for getting into another fight, for which he will be expelled. Then, in the very next scene, we see Bishop Venlin trying to talk Rawlings into allowing Darius Surret to stay as a knight, even though he failed the entrance exam. After Jerish and Darius have an encounter that results in the injuries of both boys, it ends with them both being allowed to stay in the guild. This probably sounds very familiar, as this scene was translated into the final version by moving it to a new Chapter 7, The Growing Flock, which is instead told from Venlin's point of view, opposed to Jerish's, and acts as our first introduction to Jerish in the final book. Though this deleted chapter does give us a bit more context, and the scene between Darius and Jerish is a bit longer. Next, in the tournament, we see Jerish, who has now been training for 3 years, as he is finally able to compete in the Summer's Rule tournament. This is a super fun chapter to read, as Jerish one by one defeats his opponents, each one being older and stronger than the last. Though he is only 10 years old, he defeats every opponent under the age of 14, which is as far as he can go in his division. My favorite part of this chapter is that we get to learn a bit about the training they go through regarding the different Teshlor disciplines. It appears that the first discipline they learn is the Tek Chin, followed by the Sebeka. This chapter ends with the scene where Bishop Venlin confronts Jerish and recruits him into the church. This is another scene that was moved to the Growing Flock chapter in the final book. The next deleted chapter, The Duel, occurs 2 years later. We see how unpopular Jerish still is among the trainees, as well as how popular Darius has become. By now, even Logan has befriended Darius. Jerish is acting as scorekeeper for a game, and after calling Darius out, Darius attacks Jerish. This is quickly stopped by the Masters, but Darius challenges Jerish to a duel, which Jerish accepts. After hearing about this, Master Rawlings calls Jerish to his office and gives him 2 of his personal swords to use for the duel. The duel occurs with only 3 Masters and 1 other knight in training present. It is quick, as Jerish easily defeats Darius, though without injuring him badly. Rawlings tells Jerish to keep the swords after. And finally, for the last deleted chapter, we fast forward to the end of part 3 of the book. This chapter happens just before the Summer's Rule tournament. Jerish is now 15 and is considered a legend among the trainees. He is badgering the Masters to let him participate in the live blade competition at the tournament, despite him only being 15. We do learn a bit about Hinterlandia in this chapter, which is interesting as that is generally a neglected province in the books. Though what we learn isn't great, as they don't follow imperial laws much. Slavery is still present, and the dwarves and women are treated badly. We also see more of how the Teshlor Guild is starting to distrust the Senslers. When the tournament finally begins, Jerish defeats all of his opponents and then is surprised to learn he will be allowed to participate in the live blade competition. He defeats his first 2 opponents, leaving only Darius. At that point, the tournament is interrupted to announce that Master Rawlings has died. At learning this news, Jerish forfeits the final fight. Later, Jerish meets with Master Lynch, who has now taken Master Rawlings' spot. Lynch tells Jerish that Master Rawlings wanted him to have his spadone, the sword used by Gerald de Martefeld, who is one of the founders of the Teshlor Guild. It turns out that Master Rawlings saw Jerish as his son. The chapter ends in this line: "Yes, Jerish, I think you made your father very proud this afternoon. Very proud indeed." Now, I know we kind of got this same line in the actual book in chapter 46, but honestly, it just hits a bit harder in this deleted chapter. And that concludes the deleted chapters. They definitely gave me a better understanding for who Jerish was as a character. And I definitely recommend anyone who did the Esrahaddon Kickstarter to give them a read when you get the chance. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Be sure to subscribe and watch my other videos to learn more about the world of Elan and Riyria. Thanks!